Alright folks, today I'm going to be showing you how I made the Caduceus Blaster from Overwatch, which is this thing from this game. And by the way, Caduceus Blaster is the actual name of this gun, but I figured the term Mercy's Gun would be more identifiable for a title. So after dissecting the pattern into various pieces, I was left with this and decided to make this shape the base, which is 2 layers of 10mm foam glued together. And of course with all the curves on this piece, the cuts were rough in some places, so I just took the Dremel and made that all smooth. I did want to give the blaster a little bit of the barrel, so I just cut that out using a box knife. The barrel doesn't go all the way down, but please don't hate me for that, just have mercy on me. It's good enough, okay? Now at this point it was just a matter of slapping pieces on one at a time, more or less. This was a fairly easy build after all. So starting with the barrel, I glued on a piece of 8mm foam, which I don't actually use that often. Gave both sides a bevel, so that the cross-section of the entire barrel was more or less octagonal, and glued on a piece of 2mm foam to make the detail. For these sort of side panel things that go on the front of the receiver, I guess, in total this was 2 pieces of foam, one 4mm and one 10, the bottom one being 4 and the top being 10. The bottom piece included this part right here, and it has tiny bevels on it. And the top piece also has bevels, and then just glued that to the main body. Then working my way down with these panels on the back of the receiver. This piece was also 2 layers thick, but instead of being 4 and 10, it was 4 and 2. The purpose of the 2mm foam layer being, it has these kind of rectangular cutouts, which function as lights, I suppose. And this entire piece also has a bevel on it. This piece was also just glued on. Nothing special. But you know what is special? This ridiculously impractical footwear that Mercy uses in battle. I don't know what's up with that, but I guess she has to show off her high heels somehow. Alright, next thing to put on the blaster was the trigger. And by the way, I do apologize if that last pun triggered you. But anyway, the trigger was just a piece of 10mm foam with some bevels added to it. Now for the handle itself, there wasn't a whole lot much to do on it except this little piece right here, which I just used 2mm foam for. And I also wanted to make the handle a little more comfortable to hold, and so to do so I just kind of rounded the edges on the back of the handle. Now going back towards the barrel, more or less, next part I wanted to do was the Knuckle Guard, which was also just a single layer of 10mm foam, but because of how thin it is, I wanted to either give it some internal structure or encase it in warbler. Now the first time I made the Caduceus Blaster, I used a steel rod to give it internal structure. However, I had to divide it into 3 layers, each layer being 4mm thick, making it 12mm in total thickness. This was all well and good, however after making that and then looking at it from underneath, the seam lines between the 3 layers was really obvious, so I just went with warbler encasement for this one. And that did the job adequately. Yes, you can see at this point it's really coming together. So the next part to do was this little syringe thing beneath the barrel. The cylindrical part of it is 2 layers of 10mm foam that's been rounded up with a Dremel to make it, well, a cylinder. As for the actual needle part that came out of that thing, I decided to use actual metal for that. So I just took a steel rod, cut it at a 45-degree angle, and because after cutting it like that, it actually is pretty sharp, I did manage to cut my thumb with it, so I just used my Dremel against the rod to make it dull enough so it's not really dangerous anymore. So I guess that means that steel rod and I have something in common. Then I just added the steel piece to the cylinder and glued the whole thing to the gun. Now these next few parts were a little bit tricky because they either wrap over or under the gun. So I had to give each of these pieces a little bit of clearance for that. As for the second handle, I guess is what that is, the clearance I gave that was 2.5 centimeters. And that whole piece itself is 2 layers of 2mm foam, one for the base and one for the detail. And there's also a little strip of warbler inside, just to make it a little bit tougher because I felt it needed that. Then that was glued on, and we were almost done here. And with the construction of the gun mostly done, the last area to work on was the top. So I needed to start by giving it a sort of base. For that I just used a piece of 10mm foam, and that was also rounded using the Dremel. And from that point forward, it was just a matter of adding detail. For this piece here, I used 2mm foam and gave it 1 centimeter clearance. This piece was also given 1 centimeter clearance, only this one was 2 layers thick. There's also all these little pieces on the back. I didn't record any footage of that, but pretty much every single one of those pieces were just cutouts of 2mm foam. With the exception of this thing, I guess it's the hammer. That one was cut out of 10mm foam. And with that, the construction of the gun was finished. It was just priming and painting after that. And for the primer, it was 2 coats of Plastidip as usual. For the paint job, I basically just decided to do 1 color at a time, starting with metallic silver. And across the entire gun, it was pretty much just 1 coat. There were a couple spots that had 2 coats as well though. For most of the handle, as well as that piece of 4mm foam on the front of the receiver, those were both given 2 coats of true blue. Speaking of true colors, I believe Mercy is a true natural blonde. You know why? Because heroes never die. Alright. So for the 2 panels on the receiver, those were both given 2 coats of 50% gray. As for the barrel, some of the detail on top of the gun, and some of the detail on the handle, I had to mix some of that gray with black to get more of a 30% gray, and gave it 2 coats of that. And lastly, for this little piece on the top of the gun, that was given 2 coats of snow white. And the very last thing to do were the highlights. Oh no, actually this is the last thing to do. That text on the side of the receiver, the Velo 1 thing. I didn't actually do that the first time I made this. But the second time I did, because I was able to. So I used the pattern and kind of cut the text out and used one of these things. This is a Copic marker airbrush. I just used the pattern as a mask basically, and after spraying it, this is what I got. In this shot the O in Velo 1 is incomplete, but I made sure that was finished too. As you can see here, because it is all done now. Yeah, I did make this before, but the second time around, I'm quite a lot more pleased with it. And I gotta say, this was a real blast to make. Man, this was a pretty quick video, wasn't it? It didn't take too long to make the gun either. It took like 2, maybe 3 days. But that's gonna do it for this one. If you would like me to make one of these for you, there's a link in the description that will take you to my Etsy shop. You can just go ahead and order one, or contact me and we'll go from there. I upload every single week, 2 videos per prop. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next build.